Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Asian Vision Dialogue. With me, Srenu, the host of our program. Today, the topic discussion is about the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community Pillar, which is related to climate change. And we are pleased and honored to have His Excellency Tun Ponlok, the Secretary of State of the Ministry of Environment, to be our guest of honor in today's program. Greetings, Excellency. Excellency, the climate change is one of the current hot topics in regional and global issues. And as Cambodia is ASEAN chair, could you talk a little bit about the key achievements and ongoing projects that the Ministry of Environment doing in related to the climate change issue?
First of all, thank you for having me. As you know, climate change is a very serious issue that has impact on economic development, social development of all countries, in particular in developing country. And Cambodia, as a least developed country, is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And that's why our government is very serious about addressing climate change. And we ratified the UN Convention on Climate Change back in 1995, just a few years after the first general elections. Our government takes climate change very seriously, and as an example, we integrate climate change into all the key policies and plans, strategies at the national, subnational level, starting from rectangular strategy to national development strategy, and also sectoral plan in all key sectors. Also, we have 14 ministries that have developed and are currently implementing a climate change action plan in 14 sectors. On the top of that, we also gradually increase our funding to address climate change. Right now, I think the total amount mobilized is about $600 million per year. And about half of that is from our government, from domestic budget. Of course, we still rely on external funding, mainly because of the common but differentiated responsibility principle of the convention, which implies that the developed countries who have the major responsibility in climate change, in causing climate change, should provide support to developing countries to address climate change. And of course, in recent years, we can notice that private sector started to play a more important role in implementing a project to address climate change, mainly in the energy sector, transport, for example, electric vehicle, energy efficiency, street lighting, for example, and even in forestry sector, in the so-called RED project now, the project that implemented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by growing forests to sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So we have active private sector engagement as well in this area. We also focus on the research, because in order to develop a credible policy, we need to conduct research to provide scientific evidence to support policy formulation to address climate change, for example, in energy sector, in transport, and in other waste management, water resource management as well. So in brief, our government has been doing extensive work to address climate change in the country.
Thank you, Excellency. That's really interesting to know that the government of Cambodia have committed to doing a lot of things with regard to the climate change. So apart from the Ministry of Environment, we would like to look at the ASEAN framework. So last year, Brunei as ASEAN chair in 2021, there was a proposed initiative for the establishment of the ASEAN Climate Change Center in Brunei Darussalam. So could Excellency mention a little bit about the status of development on that initiative?
Well, climate change is a cross-cutting issue, and it recognizes no national borders. So it makes a lot of sense to cooperate regionally and globally to address this issue. And this is one of the reasons that's why with Brunei initiative, member states agree to support this initiative. And last year, I think in October 2021, at the 16th ASEAN ministerial meeting on environment, all ministers agreed in principle with the proposal from Brunei to establish this center. So the center mandate is to foster cooperation in the area of climate change, focusing on the research, on development, awareness raising, information sharing, possibly joint project. Because as I said, climate change recognizes no border. So for example, having a common standard on energy efficiency, it makes a lot of sense. Having joint research on climate impact in the future is really important in the region for all countries. And as of today, I think Brunei is working on the draft agreement as a potential host, so a draft hosting agreement for this center, as well as a draft establishment of the center to be sent to all member states for consideration. And we hope that all the details and modalities for operating this center will be ready in coming months, and probably by mid this year we will be able to agree and to start operation of the center.
Well, it's a good progress from the Brunei Darussalam. Yes. So another thing I would like to mention is about our Cambodia Chairmanship in 2022. The same ASEAN Act, which is Address Challenges Together, is under Cambodia ASEAN Chairmanship this year. So from Your Excellency perspective, in relation to the environmental sector, what challenges to be prioritized would you consider?
As I said earlier, as in the case of climate change, environmental issues are quite common in the region as well, in ASEAN region. So, and it's important to have collective action to address all these issues. There are many issues, of course. I think at least the ministerial meetings on environment last year identified 8 areas, high priority area to address environment. And well, I can list some: biodiversity conservation, natural resource protection, climate change, waste management, sustainable city, marine debris, and so on. But for us, probably we have to screen it and identify the highest priority. Probably biodiversity conservation, climate change, marine debris, and sustainable city. Yeah. So we think that these are the top priority that under Cambodian chairmanship, ASEAN will need to address. Potentially some specific priority to address emerging issue. For example, electric vehicle initiative. I think it's quite promising, the technology, and it's growing fast. So we need to be ready to embrace this technology within ASEAN as well. Even on implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change, probably we can have a joint initiative toward decarbonization of ASEAN economy as well. But all these are under discussion, so have not been finalized yet.
Thank you, Excellency. So we can see that there are like not only one priority, but like more than one. So with regard to this like 8 priorities area of cooperation, I'm interested on about the partnering and cooperation. Could Excellency briefly elaborate on the key donor or partner that the Ministry of Environment are working closely with in dealing the climate change mitigation and adaptation, and how about other relevant stakeholders that Excellency would expect from them? Thank you.
You know, I mentioned earlier about the principle of common but differentiated responsibility under the UN Convention on Climate Change. So this is a really important principle for countries, especially for developing countries to understand. This means that those high emitters, historically or currently, high emitter will have to take more responsibility. Developed country, which started from the Industrial Revolution more than 200 years ago, to use technologies, carbon-intensive technologies, steam turbine, fossil fuel to develop the economy. But at the same time, they emit a lot historically. I can give some example. Historically, a country like the US emit about 15 tons per capita. The EU is about 13 tons, while Cambodia less than 1 ton per capita. So that's why under this principle, those developed countries, the so-called Annex 1 countries under the convention, will have to provide support, financial support, and technology transfer to developing countries to address climate change and to support sustainable development. And that's why we normally don't call them donor countries. We call it partners. So this is a key principle because of the convention, and it is a climate justice principle. So we have many partners, bilateral. We have the EU, Japan. Even from developing country, from the so-called G77 plus China, we have cooperation with China on low carbon program, with India on solar technologies, solar energy mainly. So the list of partners is quite extensive, and on the top of that, we have cooperation with multilateral organizations. International banks such as the World Bank or ADB, or UN agency, UNDP among them, FAO, UN Habitat, UNEP, and so on. So quite a number of organizations. And I should say that these are not the only key player in addressing climate change in Cambodia. We are witnessing a growing role of the private sector, in addressing climate change, especially in mitigation projects, in renewable energy, like solar farm, investment in solar farm, energy efficiency. I remind you about street lighting, hydropower projects, waste to energy technologies, forestry sector, and so on. So private sector start to play a growing role. And in addition to that, we have non-state players such as civil society organizations, NGOs, especially for projects at the commune level. So they are quite active in the area of climate change as well. And of course, line ministries, sector ministry are the main player in addressing climate change. Ministry of Environment role is just to support them in developing plan, to coordinate the implementations, to help mobilize resource, or help support in developing monitoring and evaluation framework. So those line ministries are the key player who make difference at the ground level through the implementation. Yeah.
Thank you, Excellency. So we can see that both bilateral and multilateral cooperation in dealing with the climate issue. So another important question with regard to the strong commitment from Cambodia to the global forum. Last year, in late December, Cambodia submitted the long-term strategy for carbon neutrality to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this shows a strong commitment from Cambodia as a country in ASEAN, which is try to contribute to the global contribution. Another thing is this year, I heard that Cambodia is also one of the first country in ASEAN that launched the strategy for carbon neutrality 2050. If I'm not wrong, it should be in February 2022. Yeah, so could Excellency talk more a little bit how is it progressing with regard to the long-term strategy?
Well, I mentioned earlier that Cambodia has been very active in working with international community to address climate change, despite the fact that we are the least responsible for climate change. We are not the cause. We are the victim of this global problem. Our leadership, like Prime Minister Hun Sen, understand this very well. And in late 2020, during the climate ambition, the UN Climate Ambition Summit, Samdech Prime Minister announced that Cambodia would develop and submit this long-term strategy for carbon neutrality by end of 2021. And we take tremendous effort, to work with our partner ministries, key line ministries, as well as development partners to analyze and to come up with this comprehensive strategy. And as you just mentioned earlier, we did submit the strategy in time on the 30th of December 2021. And yes, we are the first country in ASEAN who submitted this proposal with a target of 2050 to become carbon neutral, meaning that we emit the amount that our forest can absorb back. So it's become zero emission by 2050. So this is very bold. This is very ambitious target, but we believe it is doable because of extensive analysis has been done, including economic assessment of the actions, the 31 actions that we have proposed. So we launched officially recently. Just a week ago, we launched this document, and the next challenge is implementation. Of course, having a good plan is a nice thing, but implement it's another challenge. And we are working on this right now. How to support the implementation? So first, support line ministries in implementing their plans. I must say that this strategy is based on the input from line ministry, because line ministry have their own action already to address climate change, but we extend to 2050. Support implementation is important. Mobilize resources, both from domestic sources, but in particular from international sources such as the Green Climate Fund. You may know that developed country recommitted during the Glasgow conference on climate change recently, the 26th conference of the party to the Convention on Climate Change. They recommitted to achieve 100 billion US dollar per year resource mobilization to support developing countries to address climate change. So it's a big money, but and we have an important role to support line ministry to assess this money as well, to implement the plan. And I mentioned about the private sector because they will, the private sector companies will play an increasing role in implementing the plan. Bank as well will have an important role to provide, for example, a loan to non-traditional sector like renewable energy, energy efficiency, waste management, forest conservation, to support implementation of the plan. And one important point is the new investment law, which includes quite a number of projects related to climate change, to green development, to be qualified as a project that can receive incentive in form of, for example, tax exemption or tax holidays, so that we can attract more private sector to implement projects in this area. And we are in the process of developing a system to track progress in implementing this project, and also to identify gaps and what need to be done to fill this gap. So there's a lot need to be done, but we believe that this is within our capacity to implement. Interestingly, we have done some economic analysis of this strategy, how much it costs and how much benefit it will bring to our economy. Roughly, we would need about 500 million US dollar per year from now on, up to about 2 billion per year by 2050 to implement all the proposed actions. But on the other side, if implemented, this strategy will help contribute in creating about 500,000 jobs, new jobs, and support and help increase the GDP growth around 2.8%, up to 3% by 2050. So it's very much in line with the government vision. It's very supportive to the implementation of the government vision, 2050 vision to become a developed country for Cambodia.
That's really interesting. So, Excellency, the last question is about the future trends of the climate change response. So, what would be the future direction of the Ministry of Environment under Cambodia ASEAN Chairmanship? Are there any new projects or initiatives during our chairmanship in 2022?
Well, I mentioned earlier, we strongly support the Brunei initiative to create the ASEAN Center on Climate Change. So we, under our chairmanship, we will work with partners to develop, work plans to help mobilize resources to implement priority under this center mandate. And I also mentioned that possibly we may propose some new initiative as well, for example, on electric vehicle, or on new initiative on toward ASEAN decarbonizations of the ASEAN economies. Yeah. So that's a potential initiative that we may propose. But it's a bit early to confirm whether this will be officially proposed or not. They're still under discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, Excellency. So I think that cover everything that we want to discuss related to the climate change. So thank you very much, Excellency Tân Ponlok, for your kind and insightful contributions and your valuable time joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, our Asian Vision Dialogue has now come to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in with us, and see you again in the next episode.